always like the most awkward part is waiting for it to go live, but we're live now. And hello and welcome back to another episode of Finding Her Voice, a podcast by women who love film about the women who make film. I'm joined as always with shit. I don't know why I messed that one up, and I'm sorry, May. This is a really bad impression.
It's okay.
But
no worries.
Evan will know when to cut it out.
That's what the editing is for.
I am joined by AJ, our TV and film writer, and May, our television editor, who is kind of subbing in for Gabby, who isn't able to make it this month. And we're very appreciative of it. This month, we are talking about animation, which is kind of a medium near and dear to my heart. I kind of love it, and I never really anticipated loving it because I didn't love it as much as a kid, but I certainly like it more now. But in picking films, like a lot of genres that are like very genre specific, we had a little difficulty in finding them. Like obviously they exist, but they're few and far in between. Next month it was even harder, which I'll get to at the end. But we settled on Brave from 2012 and Persepolis, which, let me check, was from 2007. So two very different films in theory, but I feel like there's also a lot in common in terms of the coming of age story. But before we dive into it, it's June, which means it's Pride Month. So I wanted to ask you guys what your favorite LGBTQ plus film is, if you can narrow it down to one.
Currently, for me, it's Love, Simon, only because it's like the most recent. So it's the first one that popped into my head. And it's just one of those really endearing films that takes you to a happy place and you want everybody to be happy. And it's just so wonderful to see that representation be on screen, and that, you know, a lot of people took away from it, you know, or they took great things away from it when they walked out. You know, they felt like very empowered, and some people I know came out to their families. So I think it's a very LGBT positive film that people can check out.
I loved that one too. I kind of just smiled the whole time.
Yes, and I cried.
I know. And I walked out really wanting to listen to Bleachers more. Get in touch with my youth. Yeah, I loved that film. I just rewatched it actually.
Oh yeah, nice.
Yeah.
I love the final scene. It's just so good.
It's so cute. AJ, is yours similarly happy, or is it a little more dour?
Well, I have three. I know you said one.
Well, no, I have two, so it's fine.
And I know that one is probably on your list.
Probably.
But I'm a cheerleader.
Oh, yes.
So good. It's so good.
That last scene also. Sorry, continue.
If you haven't seen it, anybody listening, if you haven't seen it, go now. That's your homework. Just do it. And then Carol and Tangerine.
Carol's a good one, yes.
I love both those.
Yeah. Very different, but very resonant. And they stick with you for a while after you watch. And you're kind of like, okay, I need to think. I need to take like a moment. So yeah, they're all very different. But I think those are my top three, at least for now.
I do love those, actually. And now you did make me, because But I'm a Cheerleader wasn't on the two that I just like
Oh.
But I mean, I love it. It's in my top 5, but I totally just like forgot about it for a second. But just to make sure it's different, mine from last year, there's God's Own Country, which is on Netflix right now. Mm-hmm. And like, unfortunately, not that they should be compared just because both follow two like gay love stories between two men. But I feel like it did almost get overshadowed by Call Me By Your Name. It's almost like there was only room in the narrative for one story. And Frances Lee's story is much more frank, and it's like depictions of sex and sexuality, and it's also just really sweet and tender, and it's just like these really handsome men working on a farm with sheep, and it's just really lovely, and it's all about how like love is a force of nature. So it's on Netflix now, and it was one of my favorite films of last year. I think it might have been in my top 5. I really loved it. And then my other one was Saving Face from 2004, directed by Alice Wu. And it's about this Asian American woman just kind of working through like a family who she's not like comfortable opening up to, and her first real love. And it's just like a quintessential romantic comedy centered on people who I don't think, or centered on a group of people who don't usually get that kind of outlet. And maybe they're starting to more now, but still I feel like it was niche for the time, and it is still kind of now, unfortunately. But that one's really great. I feel like we might have talked about it on this podcast, but if people haven't seen it, it's one you have to seek out, but it might be on Amazon Prime right now. So those are my 2 for now suggestions, but I could keep going on. Like, I just thought about Moonlight, and I'm surprised I didn't think about it. Oh my
God. How could I forget that Moonlight? That was like my favorite film.
I know, it's so good.
So good.
Maybe because the romance is in front and center, and that's kind of what we're thinking about too, a little bit, except for like Tangerine. But to kind of really jarringly move over to animation now, because it's not like there's a lot of LGBTQ representation in animated films, to my knowledge. I mean,
none that instantly come to mind.
Paranorman at the end, because this is really showing how much I'm a fan. I mean, at the end of Paranorman, the guy is like, "Nah, me and my boyfriend would love to join you." When the girl like asks him out, so like that's it though. Nerd. So I was curious what your favorite animated film was when you were a child versus now, and if it's changed. Because May, I feel like I know yours because of like Twitter, and I'd be curious if that's actually changed.
Oh, what was mine on Twitter? I can't even remember.
If I'm right, I'll feel really good, and if I'm wrong, I won't tell you.
Oh yeah, I mean, one of my favorites growing up was Mulan.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah. And I feel like that's still the same. I had a big thing for Mulan and Aladdin. Like, they were like 2 of my most watched animations as a kid. And I think I could say that I still very much love them both for various reasons. I feel like Mulan can be overlooked a lot of the time.
Which is so weird, because it's definitely the most progressive, I would say.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, I don't know, maybe it's because it's not a Disney princess, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know. But it resonated with me, you know, like she has the whole family dynamic, and then just fighting for what she believes in, but to protect her family. And that's still, you know, it's very near and dear to my heart. So it's still one of my favorites to this day.
Yeah. I like one of the moments that like resonates in my mind specifically as a big like theater movie experience was her climbing the pole.
Oh yeah.
And making it, and like just being overwhelmed with joy as like a 9-year-old or whenever it came out. Yeah, like 9. And just being like, what? This is amazing. But yeah, I love those 2 too. AJ, how about you? Because I feel like our animation taste kind of syncs up with some of the weirder picks.
Yeah. Mulan was my favorite as a kid. I remember I begged for a Mulan cake, and I kept like the little figurine. I was probably 7. I kept the little figurine like on my nightstand as a kid. I was obsessed. And now I feel like I am very much the same as you, Allie. I wasn't super into animation when I was a kid, apart from like, you know, Mulan, The Lion King, sort of, Aladdin a little bit. And then as I've gotten older, I've started to appreciate it more and get into animated films more so. I mean, less so like Pixar type of stuff, but some of the weirder picks. I think right now, my 2 favorite animated films are Paprika and The Wind Rises. Oh, so good. So good. Just so good.
Can we just like make a recommendation list? I mean, we're releasing a best of the 21st century so far list of animation really soon. So that kind of is it. But like, I just want to include our specific recommendations because like, I feel like those are films that change your mind about animation. At least they did for me. Paprika certainly did, especially when I realized Christopher Nolan ripped it off for Inception.
Yeah.
Like hardcore, actually. But May, I didn't ask you, but are you like, do you have an interest in animation these days? Is it kind of just something you don't gravitate towards?
No, I still love it. I feel like it's when I go to see an animation, I always feel like I'm gonna walk away from it, thinking about it more than some other live action films that I watch. And as an adult, I forgot to mention Coraline is probably one of my, newer favorites. It kind of, I guess it kind of changed my mind about animation or what animation could be versus like the stuff we would watch as kids.
Yeah.
So I feel like that really altered the way I think about animations visually because it was just so well done. So before, like I feel like as a kid I wouldn't have liked it as much, but
That came out in like 2009, right? Because I
yeah,
was going to say, I feel like if that came out when I was a kid and I saw it, it would have freaked me out.
yes.
My poor neurotic heart wouldn't have been able to handle it. Like, but yeah, I love everything that Leica is doing with animation too, despite some like weird choices with Kubo and the Two Strings, aka the all-white cast.
Right, yeah.
So my favorite as a kid was Mulan. Also, like I just, as a little feminist to be, not knowing that that's what I was going to be, like it really resonated. But also The Little Mermaid, which is like the exact opposite in terms of progressive. And I think it's really because like I wanted her hair like desperately. Like I was just like, that's amazing. And I liked her songs a lot. And like I was a little mini theater nerd as a kid. So no, it's not cute. It's really obnoxious.
Hey, karaoke nights are so fun.
Oh God. Yeah, and I did have a karaoke machine too. But today or now it's it's really mixed because I want to say Princess Mononoke to line up with some Hayao Miyazaki love, but I think it's The Tale of the Princess Kaguya.
Oh, so good.
I sobbed at the end of that film, and I mean I sobbed harder than I've done at like most films, aside from like About Time, and I don't really know what that was about. But like
it was a sad movie, okay?
Right? The father-son relationship meant something. But The Tale of the Princess Kaguya was I would land it in my pool of like landmark game changer films for me. Like it was one that I saw and I was like, this is something that film can be that I didn't realize. And I kind of felt that with The Wind Rises too, because I saw that in theaters, whereas I saw Tale of Kaguya on a really small screen, and it could have been so much more, but like I was still just transported. So I don't know if both of you have seen that one, but that's one that I would definitely like push on people. I'm like, I don't care if you don't like animation. It's just like, it's art. Like it's so beautiful. But yeah.
Actually, I haven't seen it, but I will write it down.
I haven't. I
go watch
totally
it.
Agree.
Oh yeah, you're writing it right up for me, aren't you? Forgot about that. Yeah, I love that one. But to kind of get back on track, I guess, with our films. So again, we chose Persepolis and we chose Brave. And one's going to be more well known than others, although I feel like a lot of people know Persepolis because I think a lot of people read the book in school, which I didn't. So I'm curious if you two did.
I didn't. I have the comic, but it was because my siblings had read it and I didn't. So it kind of missed me. And I never got around to reading it just because I'm lame.
No, but, I mean, and when it's in that high school, because I feel like that's when, is it high school, like early high school, when they usually have you read it? And it's like when you have something on a reading list like that and you know it's on a high school reading list, I feel like you're less likely to read it outside of school because you assume it's kind of dry or like,
right.
I don't know, but because I never read it either. And it does seem like something I would like, but it's just because I'm lazy. Like, I don't know. I didn't get around to it either.
There's too much to read, not enough time.
Right? Along with like watching. AJ, did you? Sorry, I cut you off.
Actually read it twice. I read it once. I read it once when I was a freshman in college to help. I was tutoring high school students who needed to read it. And I was like, okay, I need to read it so that I can actually know what I'm talking about and help them. And then it was 2 years ago this month. I reviewed it I was following Emma Watson's Our Shared Shelf.
Oh, yeah.
And it was the June pick. And I mean, that book club it featured a lot of like interesting picks that I wouldn't, immediately put them on a list for a feminist book club, but that pick was really, really good. It was like the saving grace of the book club. I don't know what she was doing in the earlier months, but yeah.
I feel like I need you to write like a little book list for the write-ups, because after this and your the thing you talked about the poetry book that I picked last time, I'm curious because I feel like I'm picking wrong things. But so how did you guys like the film? I don't know. I know, May, you saw it for the first time, or were you able to?
I did. Yes. I did see it for the first time. I did like it a lot. I mean, I feel like the story was told simply, but it explored dynamics and political discontent in a way that's easily understood without losing a lot of its power. And it kind of reminded me of a lot of Under the Shadow, actually, which I saw a couple of years ago, I think, at Sundance, which was also set during like the Iran-Iraq War and the post-revolution. So it had a lot of similar themes, but I just like that it's told from her point of view, and with all the stuff, going on around her, but that it just maintains that focus on her and her family, which was really great. I just think it's visually distinct too. Like, I love the monochrome animation, and I feel like it matched the tone of the film and also stays true to what I've seen of the pages of the comic anyway.
Yeah. And sorry, you mentioned Under the Shadow, which I just wrote down because I wanted to make sure I remembered it, because I remember you talking about it.
Oh my god, it's on Netflix. Recommendation.
I know, I wrote it down. I'll put it in our post too. But I saw this a couple years ago, and I feel like when I first watched it, like, I liked it, but I thought that I ended it just liking it, not really appreciating it for what it was. But then images stuck with me later. And that's when I kind of realized, like, oh, it really was like an overwhelming kind of watch. And I think it was due to the animation style, where like just visually it just kind of like hangs on. Mm-hmm. But I also really liked it because it kept a sense of humor the whole time. Mm-hmm. Like, its lead character is really funny. And I feel like it would have been easy to not go that route, or to go more of the like either sentimental, or because everything's horrible, the way she reacts to it has to be like super like, and fairly upset. But just because she kind of kept this little punk rock attitude the whole time too, like, I really appreciated that. And I think I've grown to enjoy it more than first viewing. But AJ, how about you, since you've read the book?
Yeah, it carries a lot of that same feeling of, yes, it's dealing with some serious stuff, but that doesn't mean that these aren't real people. I think a lot of times in film, when particularly live action, and I know this is something that we're going to get to later, but a lot of times when you're telling a very harrowing story in live action, it kind of washes out the characters. And in this instance, it is a real situation and real people. But I think the amazing thing about this film is it still maintains that like humor and that relatability, and you want to laugh along. And that's a lot of that was in the source material. So I think it's part of the reason why I liked it so much, having read it before, is I know how faithful of an adaptation it really is.
And I like that you mentioned like the difference of how with live action it could actually like kind of take away some of the emotion, because usually when I talk about animation in terms of what it can do differently is the fact that like you can never do The Wind Rises or Kaguya as live action. No. And arguably you could do Persepolis as live action, but I think that what's different, like, it wouldn't be we'd be losing the spectacle of animation, but I actually think the animation enhanced like the emotional resonance, because it made you really have to think about what they were saying and what was going on. Like, you weren't distracted, which I think in a lot of animated films geared towards children, which is rightly like done. Like, I think they just try to distract rather than tell a story. I don't know if this is making sense, but it's just usually with animation, I'm glad they did it this way, because it couldn't have visually done this. But I think in this case, they couldn't have told the story as well otherwise.
And the producers actually gave her alternatives to avoid animation, since they knew it would be really, really difficult. and animation was her first choice for the adaptation. And she said, and I'll provide the link to this interview. She said, with live action, it would have turned into a story of people living in a distant land who don't look like us. At best, it would have been an exotic story, and at worst, a third world story.
That's really.
That's actually. Yeah. I was going to touch on that in the next section.
Awesome. So, I mean, I guess we can jump to that because we're kind of touching the pieces about live action. But the other thing I wanted to talk about, because I've only seen I feel like I haven't seen a lot of films like this where, like, what's the importance of using animation to tell serious stories? Like, I haven't seen Walt for Bashir yet. I haven't seen Marion Max, or is it? Yeah, it's Marion Max, which is like all about depression and anxiety. So I feel like despite the fact that I've consumed a lot of animation, I haven't seen a lot of the, like, specifically mature. You know, obviously, again, Princess Mononoke and Spirited Away and all the Miyazaki films are kind of serious, but not in the way that this is. So Mason, you wanted to touch on it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, like, you know, she was saying in the interview, you know, people are still very reluctant to watch movies that center on minorities, and especially those belonging to the international community and not ones who are living here in the US. So, like, I feel like animations transcend that wall that people put up and, you know, goes beyond their reluctance, because it's like, since it's based on a comic and people are used to maybe seeing that or reading it, and then making an animation opens it up to a broader audience who might not have watched if this had been a live action. So it's able to tell its story and humanize the characters, but also be political and realistic, all while being very distinct. And you're right, like you were saying about, you know, there's no distractions or anything like that. So it's very focused on telling you its story versus people wondering, like, what is this new place and why are these people wearing these things and all this other stuff that they might not be used to. So the reluctance is gone in a way.
Yeah, that's really, no, it does, and it just kind of proves about, like, how weirdly animation can be one of the more universal mediums of storytelling, and yet people, like, so often look down at the medium too. And it's just kind of interesting because I feel like there is a wealth of storytelling that goes on there like this, where it is able to kind of, like, bridge worlds or access, or, like, allow people to kind of gain access to other worlds without, you know, how people would usually, like, other it, which is, like, a really lazy way of putting it. But I don't know. I get what you're saying, and I do. It's one of the reasons why I like animation, is I do think it, like, kind of offers up that opportunity. But it's curious that, like, I wonder if the film would have been made. Like, you said, AJ, that in the quote that she was offered other chances, like, no matter what, she would have been able to make the film.
Yeah, the producers, they didn't specify, but just gave her alternatives of production, since they knew it would be really, really difficult to animate it in the style that the source material was. But yeah, I don't know if she had pushed for animation and kept getting told no, I don't think that she would have said, okay, let's do it in live action.
Yeah. No, I'm just curious because, like, it's good to know at least, and I know this is such a low bar, that they were still going to make it, regardless of if it was animation or not. But, like, and I know that's terrible, but it is kind of how it is, you know. Like you said, you know, people are still reluctant to make films outside of white Hollywood. Like, you know, I feel
awful.
And it takes away, you know, how it would have been labeled, you know, oh, I'm going to watch a foreign film, and some people might be like, you know, some people might not have wanted to watch it if it had been labeled like a foreign film, because people are just not gonna, oh, it has subtitles and all this other stuff. But being labeled as an animation, even though it is in French, being labeled as an animation is completely different, and immediately people will go in with a different mindset.
Yeah. But however, I wonder if the subtitles did, you know, because people are still so averse to just reading. Like,
I mean, I turn on the captions even if it's in English.
So do I.
These days I do, especially depending on where I'm watching. You know, if it's loud, I'm like, I need this. I had the captions on for Cabaret the other day. That was a weird one. But you know, I tell somebody to watch something and then I'll mention, oh yeah, and it's a foreign film. They're like, oh, I don't read films. And I'm like, why? Like, you're missing out on so much. But have either of you two seen her other films? I think it's The Voices and Chicken with Plums, I think. Both very different films. The Voice is the one with Ryan Reynolds. And he like has a talking cat and dog.
Oh yes, I have seen it.
I have not, but I want to see that now.
It's a very visually interesting film. It's just like, I'm not gonna say I liked it. It was,
Yeah.
but I didn't dislike it either. It was just very different, and I feel like she has a very distinct style when it comes to her directing, and it shows. You know, because I walked away from that film, I'll never forget it, regardless of how I feel about it.
Right. Yeah, it was a film that like I was on the fence of seeing just because sometimes I'm not into seeing films about serial killers, you know? And that's not a spoiler, AJ. It's in the synopsis, by the way. And but like because I wanted to see him in kind of a more different role, and I had just seen Persepolis, so I was kind of like, I'm just curious what else you can do. But Chicken with Plums, which came out in 2011. Which he co-wrote and co-directed. I've heard a lot of great things about from like people I follow, like the Mariah Gates, who I follow for her A Year with Women thing project. She always talked about this a lot, and I trust her opinion. And I really want to see it. And I rented it from the library and then forgot I had it and had to return it. So it is probably at your local library, so is what that means if it was at Newburyport's. So before we wrap this up, because we kind of talked about what you think this gained from being an animated film versus a live action film, but I want to make sure I let both of you guys like expand on it if you want. If you think we covered it, though, we can certainly move on to our very different film. But I also know you guys said you both had separate notes. So if you have something else you wanted to add about the film.
Yeah, I just meant like I think I moved my notes from the notes.
Yeah.
Well, I was gonna say because both of you said it, like both of you did, so I just didn't know what that meant.
The only thing that I wrote down that I didn't mention was if it had been turned into a live action movie, I feel like Hollywood would end up doing it like Exodus Gods and Kings.
Oh.
And like I don't want that. Like nobody wants that.
You know, I was also thinking she's in this very small category now of authors who have directed their own works.
Mm-hmm.
Too. Because who else would it have been? I forget his name, Steven something, who did Perks of Being a Wallflower. And I always thought that the movie version improved upon the book.
Mm-hmm.
I also hated the book.
Yeah.
Like a lot. So I'd be curious now to read it. And AJ, I'd be curious to know if you thought it improved upon it at all. Or if you remember enough of reading it to even make that assessment.
Yeah, I think the obvious improvement is you get to see it played out as it's intended to be. And I think in certain ways you can pick up on the nuances that she wanted to imbue in the text, in the film. And for me, I think, at least from what I remember reading it, I don't think that there was anything that she like remedied or any mistakes. Especially, the Perks of Being a Wallflower, that example of, changing it and improving upon some of the less savory things.
Yeah, making the lead character likable. Like, I understand he's going through a lot. Yeah. But you can still make him somebody you want to be inside the head of, like, but that's just my opinion. But I think I read it at the wrong time. Sorry, continue, AJ. I suck.
I just think that what makes it really special is it's her vision, and she gets to tell her story the way that she wants it to be told.
Yeah. Which is such a great segue, by the way, because the director of Brave definitely did not get to tell her story the way she wanted it to be told. Like, I couldn't have not planned that. So I guess we're talking about Brave, obviously. And I know this film, I don't know if it's divisive or if it's just divisive to me because I love it and so many people don't, that I get overheated about it. I think it's probably that. But I guess my first question is, did you guys like it whenever you first saw it? And how, and obviously don't rank like all 20, but how does it kind of like fit within your Pixar ratings? And I know like I'm not a huge Pixar person, but the ones I love, I really do think are great. And AJ, you said at the start that you don't necessarily love them that much either. So I guess May, I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are on first.
I mean, I did like it. I feel like I like it more now than I did when I first saw it. Because, well,
do you think that's backlash related too, though? Just curious, because I think some of my love for it is because there's such a backlash.
Some of it is, and some of it is also like, you know how you grow out of that hole. Sometimes you start thinking the way a lot of like, we get a lot of male points of views, and that's what I probably ended up reading, and it just kind of like messed with my mind. Yes, yeah. Exactly. So, you know, just kind of, I think I rewatched it a couple years ago or so, and I feel like I just appreciated it more. I mean, it's that rare Pixar film too that just centers a woman and her wants while also exploring a complicated relationship she has with her mom. And I think that's just something movies tend to steer clear of a lot. And, you know, for lack of a better term, it was brave that this film embraced all of these qualities. So yeah, I do like it and appreciate it much more now because we don't get to see mother-daughter relationships play out very often in TV and movies. And I think that that's very upsetting. And this movie kind of, it just is important primarily because it's focused on a woman and also because it started off with a woman wanting to tell the story about, you know, her and her daughter, basically. And I think that that's a big deal.
Yeah, I do too. Especially when you do think of all the mother-daughter films out there, and I don't feel like there are a ton, especially since the first one that just came to mind was the Sisterhood of the what is it, the Yaya Sisterhood or something. Like, why? like that shouldn't be at the top of my list of what I think of. And I know there's more, but they're usually small. Like Advantageous is technically a mother-daughter story, but it's also like a weird cerebral science fiction film, which I love and I will forever to this day recommend. But AJ, so I'm curious what you thought of it too.
I'm in the same boat of, I think part of the reason why I like it so much is because other people had such an issue with it.
Yeah.
And I mean, let's just put it this way, like my inner monologue is now in a very thick accent. I keep like talking to myself in Merida's accent. But
which is great, by the way.
I know that Tangled isn't a Pixar film, technically, but everything that I was missing from Tangled, and I love Tangled, everything of the mother-daughter relationship in that movie that I was missing, that I felt that I wanted more from, I got with Brave.
Yeah. Yeah, I really do love the mother-daughter relationship and that so much. And I know that the big issue with it is the bear. Like, it's the fact that dominates so much of it, and it was so cool up until that point. But the fact is, like, beyond the hive mind, like, and I do that where, like, it's almost like the first review out of the gate will set the tone. And it's either like you don't want to be the person who likes it more than you don't want to be the person who doesn't. And it's weird. But with this one, I like kind of immediately loved it because it checked a lot of boxes of just general things that I like in film. But I also saw it with my sister at like 10 at night, and we just had like a wonderful time, and we both cried. And like, because like as I've gotten older, I've turned into a mess of a human, and like I don't know, like I just really resonated with it. Like not a lot, obviously, but there was just like pieces of her characterization, like the general mess that she was, and like kind of being a little rough around the edges, that I was like, this is kind of cool to see. And it's not like I haven't seen myself represented, and that's not why I liked it, but it's because whenever you have that little bit of a like a personal connection to a character, you're going to like it more. That's just obvious in film criticism. But yeah, no, I certainly like have heightened how much I love it, almost in the same way of how I'm doing right now with A Wrinkle in Time, where it's like, I feel like, and it actually goes into the argument right now about needing more female and people of color film critics, because it's like, no shit. But also, since there aren't, it's like I look back at Brave and I wonder if that film had had more female voices covering it, which I would be curious to go and look now on Rotten Tomatoes and see how many did. Like, what would the narrative been surrounding it? Like, I feel like that one was one that was kind of skewed. Like, people shouldn't have been giving more favorable reviews to like Cars 3 because it's like,
God.
like in Brave. But yeah, so I certainly rank it high in mine. And do you think your opinion of it would have changed if Brenda Chapman had been able to direct the full thing? Or do you think if the bear storyline was always in there, which I'm not sure if it was, I think it was a piece of it, but I definitely don't know if like the wacky hijinks of it would have taken like an hour.
Yeah, I feel like I would have liked it maybe, better initially had she been allowed to complete the film, because it is a big deal since it was just like a very personal thing for her, and it was based on her relationship with her daughter. And I feel like doing the bear stuff didn't necessarily bother me, but it was kind of like that whole Princess and the Frog thing where it's like, let's turn the people into, an animal for a little while and just see how that goes.
Yeah.
I do feel like she would have been turned back into a human much faster had, she stuck around.
Or it would have been held off longer, so like the anticipation of it felt more.
Right. And I also feel, sorry, go ahead.
No, I didn't have anything yet.
I was going to say that it's just, I feel like people were harsher on the movie because it centered a woman, because I feel like a lot of men do that. And some women, unfortunately, too, they're just harsher on female characters, even though I think it was like, it reminds me of that one critic who wrote a whole article about how the relationship between the mother and the daughter in Lady Bird was abusive.
Right.
And, how he saw that, I don't know.
Nope,
because it wasn't. And it kind of reminded me of that. So like, I don't know what they were watching, so I feel like it was just judged much more harshly. I feel like if this had been a man in that role and it was his father-son relationship, it wouldn't have been as critiqued in that kind of way.
Yeah. Same. I mean, it's just something we've talked about. Like, it's just like, it's just like it. And especially since I think in 2012, it's like, I feel like weirdly enough, since it was only a couple of years ago, but I still feel like the narrative hadn't shifted enough at that point to start noticing when that kind of thing was happening, when the narrative, like when the, when the voices dominating the conversation were all men and it was a female story, like through and through, it's a woman's story. Like, it's never about a dude in any way. Like, it's a mother and a daughter. So I do feel like, I don't know. But yeah, it is frustrating because I agree. And I get the comparison to the Lady Bird thing. It's almost like they just lost interest and there wasn't any like really exciting set piece. So yeah, I don't know. I get mad.
I think that if she had, full creative control, and I hate that this is even a worry, but I would worry that at that time, as you mentioned, when the conversation hadn't really shifted to focus on like, hey, who are we actually listening to and who are we spotlighting? Like, who are we paying attention to? I worry that if she was given full creative control, it would be kind of like a target of more men would want to interject and say, okay, well, you're telling your story and it's very like focused on women, and make sure that you include something that appeals to boys.
Because God forbid a man is supposed to relate to a woman's story.
Exactly. And I just feel like I hate that is even a worry of like giving women control and she still has to worry about appealing to men and like making it palatable. It's just so disappointing.
Yeah.
And like, isn't it so gross to think about how long John Lasseter was in charge there with all the shit he was doing? And Brenda Chapman, I don't know, like disagrees with a creative person. And they're like, well, no, now you can't have control. Whereas like he literally had people like restraining him from hanging out with people dressed as fairies. Like, what the fuck? But yeah.
And it just goes back to like with and this is not well, it's sort of Pixar, I guess, but for the marketing for Tangled, this was just Disney, but for the marketing for Tangled, how they marketed it so that they included, Flynn Rider in a lot of the pieces and the posters or whatever, so that they can be like, hey, this is for boys too, because
Yeah.
if it was just her, then people wouldn't maybe have gone to see it as much, or they think that boys wouldn't have been interested in it, which
Yeah.
is a shame.
And
It's like
like
the Wrinkle in Time posters. Everybody
Yes.
got up in arms about that.
because it's too colorful.
Yeah, it's pastel colors.
Or even recently with Coco, and the fact that they advertised the Olaf short to be like, well,
Oh my God.
white parents aren't going to want to bring them to this. So, like, let's show them a Frozen short. And that was easily the worst part of it. And
It's like
people
a half
loved
an
that
hour.
film. I was one of the few people who were not blessed with it being cut. And I didn't get to go to a press screening for it, so it wasn't there. And, like, I kept looking at my watch and looking at my boyfriend and being like, this is a joke. Like, it almost ruined, like, we almost lost interest in the movie because we're like, oh my God, we've already been here for a half hour plus the previews. And then, of course, the movie was amazing. But it just shows that, like, I mean, this is so obvious. I hate even saying it, but, like, studios don't trust diverse voices or diverse stories. They don't think that audiences are going to come in, and time again, it's being proven otherwise. And didn't an article just get released where it's like the movies that are tanking are the ones led by straight white men right now?
And that's the thing that Hollywood hasn't, and I can't believe they haven't understood this yet. Diversity does sell. There is a large audience for it. I mean, look at this is completely off topic, but just look at like Fast and the Furious
I was
franchise
just thinking that.
and
Yeah.
how much money it has made Universal, and look at its cast. So
Seriously.
yes, people will go see these things.
I know, it's insane. Or, even, and I know it had Marvel tagged on it, but Black Panther, like, that was a phenomenon too, like, or not a phenomenon if people like followed the fact that, like you said, those audiences exist and they're going to go and champion them. But like, if that isn't like the, I don't know, like anvil on the head to Hollywood to be like, wake the fuck up and tell these stories, like, I don't know what else is, because that is like I still think worldwide it's still beating the Avengers, which
It is, yeah.
no
It is,
solo
yeah.
movie has, right? So that's insane. And I know we've gotten off topic, but I think this is really important. So, and I feel weird scooting on back to Brave, but I feel like we talked about the bear stuff, which was kind of related to my next thing, was just about how arguably I would say this is visually the most gorgeous film of theirs. I think Inside Out comes close, and I think a lot of the visuals in Coco come close too. And maybe I'm just a sucker for like the Scotland water scenes or whatever, ocean scenic scenes, because I get the same way with How to Train Your Dragon too. But like, I was so swept up and immersed, and even the way they did her hair and the detail there, and like the fact that they even drew her to be like a little muscular. And I know that's small, and that's a small detail that shouldn't be championed either. But it's when usually like they do the whole proportion thing where like the head is bigger than like the hips. It's just like, it's a little bit of a cool thing. And also the fact that she never has a love plot at all. And I just think, I don't know. I think there's so much about it that's worth celebrating, in the same way that there's so much about A Wrinkle in Time that's worth celebrating. And people will pick on this one specific thing that annoyed them and harp on about it, like with the bear or with A Wrinkle in Time, the fact that it didn't live up to the expectations of how weird it should have been. And yet, despite the fact that there's a really powerful story in there about like self-worth, that people are like, well, no, that's not as important. Where's the creepy sci-fi?
Even
like,
though it really is.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I'm like, if I brought my little sister to this, she'd be freaked out. Like the devil scene on the beach, that's weird. And his whole like deconstructing of everything. So I don't know, but that was just more of a like personal point that I wanted to make, was that like it's visually stunning, and I feel like it just doesn't get credit, clearly, as I've hammered home. But I think both of the films we talked about today don't get as talked about as they should, except Inside. I mean, Persepolis I think does get talked about in like critic circles. But I think outside of that, when you step outside our niche of film Twitter, that it doesn't get talked about as much.
Allie's sick of film Twitter.
Today, with everybody's responses to Brie Larson, calling her like racist.
Oh my
ageist.
god!
Yes, I am. It's not all white dudes saying it, which is really alarming to me.
I know. It's
but
crazy.
We can talk about that in the chat or something. But is there anything else you guys wanted to add about those two films?
I mean, in regards to Brave, I completely agree about it being visually stunning, and I think, well, because I remember one of my friends who saw it, and he's an artist, and he was just like so taken with like the way that they did her hair because it was so detailed, and he felt the same way about Moana. He's like, oh, look at the hair, like that's just important, and so it's just very detailed in the fact that it was like so big and everything that was going on. And I like that she was muscular too, like you mentioned, also because it makes sense, right? She used to shoot arrows, so she's obviously very active.
You think, right?
Yeah. So that makes a lot of sense. And I wish that it makes me sad that the director didn't get to finish her story, because Pixar I think she's been the only female director.
She has. Yeah.
And they haven't had one since, and it's 2018. And I just think that's pathetic.
And they've made 20 movies. They're like Marvel. It's Disney.
Yeah.
It's Disney. And the first time that in each one, when they first get a female director, it's co-directed by a man.
It's dude's knee up in here.
Accurate.
That might be in the title. That's excellent. So we've been ending our podcast recently with kind of a what are you listening to, watching, reading, God forbid, if I ever pick up a book, which I did, and it's just sat in my bag for a week. So I don't know if either of you want to start. May, since I wish I had picked yours, I'm kind of curious if you want to start.
Sure. I mean, I was recently watching Killing Eve. I had heard such great things about it, and it stars Sandra Oh and Jodie Comer. I think that's how you say her last name. And it's just exceptionally addictive, and it has all these great twists and turns that keep you engaged. But beyond that, it's also just a fascinating story, and it's nice to finally see Sandra Oh take center stage in a show like this one. It has a lot of females involved behind the scenes as well. And it's just a very, very well done series. And it was amazing too, because every week viewership actually increased, which is very rare for shows. Like over time, everything just drops. But for this one, it was like the opposite. And I think that everybody should just watch it, because it's just, you won't want to not continue to the next episode after every single one.
Isn't the only other show that's done that in recent history is This Is Us? And that might have even like had a short-lived upwards trajectory and then just kind of like held on to it. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I'm only on episode 3. Yes, on episode 3. And like big things have happened, and which I won't say here because AJ, I desperately think you should watch this. But you can tell, and I really mean this, you can tell it was written by a woman. Mm-hmm. Like with a lot of reasons, but it's written by Phoebe Waller-Bridges, who did that show Fleabag, which I've only seen one episode of, and she also did this show called Crashing, which I binge watched all 6 of, and apparently there's no more, like recently. And she has a really, really distinct voice, and all of these projects have been super different, and yet watching Killing Eve, you're still like, that's totally her. So it just shows, I don't know, it's like, it's cool to see a writer who's so quickly carved out this space for herself and done it through projects that are so vastly different. And also, I think Sandra Oh is so good. Is so amazing. So good. And I didn't know the little psychopath, Jodie. What's her name again? Jodie
Comer. Mm-hmm.
She was the best friend in that My Mad Fat
Diary. I love that series.
So yeah, no, she's the best friend.
Yeah.
So, and she's like a complete 180 of what you expect. She's insane.
Her giggling freaks me the hell out.
Oh my god, yeah. In episode 3, there's a scene where she like turns, and like it was the stuff made of nightmares. Like it was like she just looked like a wolf on the prowl, and I was like, I need to like watch something silly afterwards. I actually think I watched an episode of Parks and Rec after that.
Palate
I was disturbed. Yeah, exactly. It was so good. But AJ, I don't think I've heard of your pick. Or I mean, I've heard of part of it, but not the first.
Well, I'm only 2 episodes in, but I'm watching The Staircase because I'm like every other person on earth with a Netflix account, and I can't not watch true crime docuseries. And
I can't do it.
So after I finished, I mean, I've watched too many. I didn't watch Making a Murder because it just dragged on. But like Jinx is so good.
So because you love Bill Hader, right? This is a bit of a tangent, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I watched all these interviews where he talks about how much he loves true crime. So clearly, yeah, right. Your tastes sync up, but you should continue because the next one's. Like, I should be watching some of these that you're mentioning.
So yeah, The Staircase, very, very good. And then The Handmaid's Tale. I'm assuming both of you guys are caught up. If not, I'm not going to say anything like.
I'm not caught up, so don't spoil.
Okay.
I'm not caught up, but I'm spoiled on everything because I've read everything and I'm kind of like, I have thoughts, but none that I can say here.
Oh no.
I can't actually have an opinion.
In the notes, I did spoil something on accident. I didn't mean to, but there's
I just saw you delete.
Yep. I deleted it so you wouldn't read it.
Okay.
There's a moment or a few moments between Elizabeth Moss's June and Yvonne Strahovski's Serena Joy, and they're very, very, very womanly. I don't know if that's the right word, but it really captures the dynamic that women have uniquely with each other, especially in times of turmoil or extreme stress. And there's a way that I find myself interacting with other women, just in terms of like communication and the way that you just exist around other women. And I think that there are a few moments in later episodes in season 2 that really captured that. And I don't know, I just really, really enjoyed those moments in an otherwise very dark and depressing show.
I know that's kind of my problem right now. And I don't know if I even mentioned it here, but I'm at the point where I am looking for a very specific type of show. And I think the best word to describe it is playful. Like Killing Eve, dark, but it has a playful energy to it. It's why I love Brooklyn Nine-Nine. It's why I love The Magicians. Like there's always just some kind of air of like levity to it, even though something bad's going on. Like, and I know I'll love The Handmaid's Tale. Mm-hmm. I know I would love The Leftovers. And it's just me pushing back and being like, listen, I need some happy things. The world's kind of on fire. And I just need some like escapism, especially since I watch every movie. But I really need to see The Handmaid's Tale. And I like kind of kick myself for being behind on that because it's like, really? Like, I'm not watching that show? But yeah. So I'm kind of embracing the whole Pride Month thing and the fact that I still have my Filmstruck account because they're adding a lot of films. So like I said, I started Cabaret the other night. I haven't finished it. I watched that's messed up. I watched Cat on a Hot Tin Roof because I'm starting to explore Paul Newman films a little bit more. And, you know, nobody lied. He is really handsome. And also I thought that film is really racy considering the time that it came out. Like, it came out in the 50s, and I know that they had to get away with things that in the original Tennessee Williams play were more explicit, but, like, the subtext is kind of, like, yelling at you, like, he's gay, and he loved this guy. And it's, like, whereas I feel like people who watched it originally were just, like, they were just really good friends.
Just guys being dudes.
Yeah, right? And then I watched Hedwig and the Angry Inch for the first time. And, like, it is, like, just shot into my top 200 films ever, which I have a list of. So I've really been finding some things that I've loved. And then I'm also just listening to Never Say Die in Graffiti, like, literally on a loop by the New Churches album, which I know makes me, like, super basic. But, like, I just love me some, like, girl synth pop. So yeah, that's what I've been doing while watching my playful TV shows. Like,
hey, I'm excited for the Christina Aguilera album coming out tomorrow. So I don't know.
It comes out tomorrow?
Yes, it does.
Oh, what a shot back to like my childhood.
I know.
Whoa. The 90s are coming back.
Her best stuff was in 2006, but we'll see how this pans out.
Well, you were a super fan. You have
Yes.
it docked by year. I mean, I had those people too, so I'm not saying anything, but it really does show you that like the 90s hung on, and it's because we're all nostalgic as fuck. So thank you everybody for joining us again for another episode of Finding Your Voice. Next month for Mamma Mia 2. Here we go again, which I just put together the why is titled like that. I know, I'm so dumb, but like it is what it is. We're going to be covering musicals, and let me tell you that we have not had a harder time picking out films than this. I don't think we ever had. It's like we literally found 3, and it wasn't for a lack of trying. Like I Googled everything I could, like musicals just written by women and not like just stage stuff. Obviously, it's things we can watch. So we'll be watching Across the Universe and oh my god, Starstruck, which I just watched for the first time, which is on Filmstruck. I don't know if Across the Universe is available anywhere readily, but it might be on Amazon. So make sure to watch along so you can join the conversation. And thank you again for joining us. And May and AJ, where can they find you on social media?
Oh, they can find me on.
Don't worry.
I thought AJ was gonna go first. They can find me on Twitter at May MAE. Part of my last name, ABDU. That's where I mostly hang out.
Right.
And I'm also over on Twitter, trying not to actively engage in #film Twitter. But you can find me at AJ_Caulfield.
Great. And you can find me at Allison AJ, because I like to keep things simple. And it was really boring as a teen when I created my account. But yeah, thank you guys so much. Bye.